Kodak Tmax 400 claims to be the sharpest film in the world. Is it? I wanted to do some more film comparisons to Tri-X like I began earlier in the year. But to keep things consistent, rather than do them every now and then, I went ahead and got 49 different film stocks, everything I could get in 35mm from B&H and Freestyle. So unless they were out of stock, I got a roll of it. Now, if this part of the video seems familiar, it's because I'm using this portion of the video for all 49 of them rather than record it 49 times. So if you want to skip ahead to the H&D curves or the prints, time codes are right over here. For those of you that haven't seen this part of the video before, here's what I've done. So I wanted to use each film with the exact same shot, which is a headshot of me with a Kodak Gray Card Plus, which happens to have a red, blue, and green patch, a cyan, magenta, yellow patch, and then a dark and a neutral flesh tone. Then, with those shots taken, I bracketed every shot in third of a stop so that we can make sure we have a negative of equal shadow density to the base target film of Tri-X. Now, the reason I use Tri-X is because it's just been around for a long time and it's a very popular film. So it's a good base film to compare everything to. Then, once everything was developed, which was developed in D-76 at stock for the manufacturer's recommended time, I printed everything on Ilford using the exact same aperture, contrast settings, developer, and everything. The only thing I changed was my exposure time, and that was to make sure that I compensated for any base fog variation from one film stock to another. Other than that, everything was left the same so that we can have a comparison of just the qualities of the film. Now, there's going to be some differences in contrast, especially on the high end, and that's because the manufacturers getting their development time may not have used the same target that Kodak used for Tri-X. And that's okay. We're not looking at the overall contrast for everything. What we're really looking at is grain characteristics, tonality, how the film treats the shadows versus the highlights, that sort of thing. And we're looking at spectral sensitivity, thus the Gray Card Plus, rather than just a regular Gray Card. So we're going to go ahead and look at H&D curves, which if you saw one of my earlier videos on sensitometry, I like to use pen and paper and make my graphs. However, my wife was really ready to make sure I was done with this project. So she put everything into a spreadsheet for you all. So even though I don't like them, I want to show them to you thanks to her. Then we're going to go ahead and look at the prints side by side with the same print made from Tri-X. And from there, you can decide if you like the film and if you want to go and use it. So let's go ahead and take a look at the curves, and then we'll go to the prints. Once again, we have Tri-X with our blue line, and Tmax 400 represented by the red line. In this case, we have an almost complete straight line from end to end with the Tmax 400. There is a little bit of a toe on the left side, but we have pretty much just exposure density build, almost no peaks and valleys. That's a very linear response, and that gives us excellent tonality separation from top to bottom. So this is the ideal. This is what all films want to be. Virtually no toe, no shoulder, and a straight line response from end to end. So fantastic performance in this case by the chart. So let's go ahead and switch over to the prints and see what the actual real life differences are. Now that we see the prints, let's look at some of the general differences and similarities. Then we'll zoom in and look at the more particulars. So first off, let's start with the color chart and how it's rendered. Tri-X is before, is nice and even, dark tone all the way down the side, which are the primary additive colors, and then the secondary subtractive colors here with a dark and a light flesh tone. We can see here with the Tmax 400 that we're a little bit different, particularly with the blue and the yellow. So the yellow comes out a little bit lighter, blue a touch darker. Now it's always been my opinion that the Tmax has always rendered the scene a little bit like if there was a Raton number 6 filter over the camera lens. So Raton number 6 is lower in saturation than a number 8. It's a very light yellow. And this, I think, kind of bears out with what we're seeing here. Now, Kodak does say that with Tmax 400 that they used spectral sensitivity dyes to mimic more of how the human eye perceives color. So it could be that that's exactly what we're seeing here. And this may be why a lot of people don't like the way the Tmax 400 renders things, because it is almost like it's got a yellow filter on it all the time. Just a light one, but constantly, as opposed to Tri-X. It is a little bit hotter in the contrast. That's just more of a development time issue. So I do have a little bit brighter highlights through here, but otherwise it renders tones pretty good. My whites, mediums, and blacks are just almost exactly the same as the Tri-X. White, maybe just it is a little bit brighter. Again, that's more of a development time issue than anything else. But overall, the tonality is good. It's not night and day like using an orthochromatic or a infrared film, but it's pretty darn good. So let's zoom in a little bit and take a look at some of the fine details and see what kind of differences we have there. All right, immediately what we can see is we do have a little bit finer grain in the Tmax 400, particularly up in this area. We can see it with the smooth detail. The fine detail under, or in the skin rather, on my forehead seems fairly close. The finer grain does give, I think, just a slight edge to the Tmax 400. But one interesting thing is, even though they are both exposed exactly the same, they both seem to have the same shadow detail. I'm picking up a little bit of detail in the shadow here that I don't with the Tri-X. Now, we saw with the curve that I don't have a sloping toe on the curve. It almost immediately jumps up. So this could be an actual example of how the shadow separation is a little bit better with the Tmax than the Tri-X, even though everything else looks apparently the same on paper. So that nice little touch, but not necessarily a deal breaker. Here we can see the detail of the fabric and a little bit more detail in areas such as the collar, which seems to be where my camera really wanted to lock focus on just about all the shots. And the detail's pretty good. Nice detail in my pore shaving job on my Adam's apple. Overall, detail's fairly close. It is a very sharp film. It is a very fine grain for a 400 speed, with just a touch more detail in the shadows. You can pick up maybe just a little bit more separation here, but that might just be kind of splitting hairs at that point. It is a very small amount, but in certain photographs that may be all that it takes to get a really great photograph. Is sometimes those very small amounts of added tonal separation. In this case, doesn't really do a whole lot for it, but your particular application may be a little bit different. So overall, both films very good at tonal rendition. As I said, the Tmax seems to be a little bit less sensitive to blue, a little more sensitive to yellow than Tri-X, but the grain is definitely smaller, not leaps and bounds like a 25 speed or anything, but it's a little bit sharper. and then a little bit more shadow separation. Otherwise, they're both really fantastic films. So thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe, and we will see you next time.